Hi everybody and welcome back to Mrs. Mummypenny Talks. We're on to episode 13 now of my latest season, which is the big questions. And I'm doing something a little bit different this week because I met my guest virtually, Sam Baines, in a Meta creators group that we're in. And we sort of engaged over some sort of meetings where we're all trying to help each other. And I thought it'd be really good to actually interview you about your life and what you go through, because Sam is deaf and is thriving in her own world. So I thought, what a perfect topic for a podcast, The Big Question: how can deaf people thrive? And who better to answer it than you, Sam? So thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, and nice to connect in our weird meta group.
Yeah, so I should explain, because I don't know how I ended up in it, maybe the same way as you, but I think I had like a few viral Instagram posts this year, and I think they worked out that I needed a little bit of help because my Instagram could be better than it is. So I just got invited into this program, and then it's super helpful, isn't it? Like there's just lots of creators from all different niches, which is what I really love, because I'm used to just talking to sort of personal finance people all the time, and this way I get to talk to all different people.
Yeah, I like to think that they found people with incredible potential and invited us all to a group to like excel and win at life on social media. But yeah, it's really nice to connect with people and also get tips because, you know, obviously I'm deaf, as you mentioned. I lip read, I have a hearing aid. I also have ADHD, which means that my profile is like a little bit of everything of whatever I've decided impulsively to do that day. So it's nice to have kind of a group to help you focus, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Sam, tell us a little bit about, I love asking this question. So not just what do you do, but what is your why? Why do you do what you do?
Well, and I'm an actress. I've been in things like The Crown, Call the Midwife, Silent Witness, and I do that because I love it and I just really enjoy it and always have since I was little. And so I'm an actress because I like it. And then I did stand-up comedy for 7 years and did 2 Edinburghs and a UK tour. And I really enjoyed that because I was like my own boss and I could write my own material and talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. But I actually stopped doing that because of my deafness and something called listening fatigue, which is because I live in a hearing world. I lip read, and lip reading is really tiring, because if you imagine focusing really intently on someone's lips like all day to try and understand, and also lip reading isn't a perfect science. Most of the time you can max get like 90% of what people are saying, and then you sort of have to fill in the blanks like a crossword, you know, with context or body language and things like that. So it can be really tiring. And I actually found the comedy industry, you know, like the traveling on public transport, the arriving in really loud rooms where audience are like mingling around, and hostage, the dog's barking now, where audience are mingling around and like drinks are being made and then comedians are talking to you in the green room. I found it just really tiring, and because I do so many things, I kind of had to take time out afterwards, and it was affecting the other things I do. So I stopped doing that. But I'm also an author and writer and a broadcaster and deaf advocate. And the why is because I'm deaf myself. I found out 8 years ago. It was a complete...
Only recently?
Yeah. And
So
it was
like a degenerative thing, or have you always struggled with your hearing from a young age? Or?
So I wouldn't say I've ever struggled. I just thought that this was the world and that everyone sort of, and I naturally was lip reading even at school. Like I used to sit in the front row, I could lip read the teacher, and obviously it was called goody two shoes and stuff, but I was like, how does anyone like understand what's going on in the lesson if they don't sit in the front? So looking back, I think it started much younger, but I didn't have a hearing test until I was 29, which is when I found out. So my whole life I didn't have one. My mum has hearing aids as well, and it can be hereditary deafness. So I do think it kind of runs in our family. But I don't know. I was born just before the newborn hearing test started, which was,
Right.
it started in like the early 90s. So I don't know if I was born with full hearing or not. I assume I was born with full hearing, and then it slowly kind of got worse with age. But yeah, I only found out 8 years ago, and it was a complete shock. And my way of dealing with things is to like research everything and like throw myself into all the charities and meet people and ask them questions. And I guess that's what I do, that to help other people in that situation, and also help other people feel confident about being deaf and learn to love their deafness or love their hearing aids or cochlear implant, or you know, whatever it is they use, because I think it's so important, especially in a hearing world and in a non-accessible world for disabled people. We're quite often made to feel like we don't fit in, we're not kind of valued, and I want to combat that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So can I ask about, so there's going to be different sort of severities of deafness, and people that are born, I suppose it's graded maybe. I know nothing about it, so you absolutely like treat me like I'm a newborn that knows nothing about deafness. But yeah, so you can be born with being completely deaf, or it can be like a degenerative thing that happens as you age. Like, what are the different levels of it?
Yeah, so there are lots of different ways you can become deaf. You can be born deaf, you can become deaf from sort of sound wear and tear if you're in loud environments. A lot of musicians become deaf and
Yeah,
get tinnitus, radio presenters, people who work in construction, in the army. Then there's also things that can cause deafness, like certain diseases like meningitis, and certain side effects to other things like some cancer treatments and things like that can cause deafness. Deaf with a lowercase d as a term covers everyone in the deaf community. So, you know, whether you're born deaf, whether you have mild hearing loss, as an audiologist might call it, you know, deaf covers us all. And I think one of the big things is, and the misconceptions is, I say to people I'm deaf, and they'll say, well, you're not really, because you can hear me. But actually, you know, a lot of the time I am lip reading. So,
yeah,
you know, we started this recording and I couldn't hear you initially. There was no sound, but I could still understand what you were saying because I was lip reading you, even
yeah,
if there was no sound. And, you know, you've probably got an example that other people don't get to get, which is that it could have seemed like I could hear you from my reply to lip reading you.
yeah,
So people don't understand the level of how much you might not be able to hear, because quite a lot of us living in a hearing world are lip reading and doing other things to kind of get by. Hearing, I wear one hearing aid. I have deafness in both ears, but it's worse on one side. Hearing aids can help, but they will never like top up your hearing to be of a full hearing level. So they don't cure deafness in any way. So they help, but in certain environments, like an environment with a lot of background noise, like a restaurant, if we were talking and there was a group of us, it would still be very difficult, even with my hearing aid and the modern technology that hearing aids have. It would still be very difficult and tiring for me, and I would be lip reading and sort of having to pay a lot of attention. So there are different levels of deafness, but I do find that hearing people are very preoccupied, no offense, with the level of deafness. And actually it's not about that, because anyone who's deaf is living in a non-accessible world for them, no matter the level of deafness that they have. So I think people always want to sort of gauge your deafness as to work out like how bad it is for you, but actually it's all difficult. So, you know, I don't like to answer that question, but obviously I do in my book. So the levels of deafness tend to be mild, and this is a medical model. Mild, moderate, severe, and then severe can also be profound. So profound deafness normally means that people don't hear very much at all. But also another misconception is that a lot of deaf people don't hear anything, and that's not true. The majority of deaf people can hear sound and noise. They just might not be able to distinguish details. And actually there's 18 million people with some form of hearing loss or deafness in the UK. So that is 1 in 3. So there's a lot of us, and we could take over, is what I'm saying.
Gosh, that is huge. That is absolutely huge.
And the majority of that 18 million are people like me that have some, still hear some sound, but might not hear all. You can use hearing aids, you can use a cochlear implant, you can use other aids. You can decide not to use any of those things because, there are things that come with it, like hearing aids hurt when you first start wearing them. If you have implants, you go through an operation to do that. And some people decide that, that's not for them. Some people use British Sign Language. I wasn't brought up in an environment where that was accessible to me, so I learned to lip read subconsciously. But you can also go to lip reading classes, so there's also a lot of different experiences within that.
And what would you say, like, your biggest, like, frustrations or bugbears about sort of day-to-day life and the problems that you come across most commonly?
I think the main problem is hearing people not believing that it's a disability or not believing that it's difficult. I think because there's something called a deaf accent, which is when your voice has an accent because you're deaf. Because I don't have a deaf accent, people assume that I don't have much deafness. And actually having a deaf accent has no relation to the level of deafness that you have. It's determined by lots of other things, like your access to language, whether you brought up in a deaf family or not, also just, whether you went to, some children were sent to schools where they were made and forced to use their voice, even if they didn't want to, and sort of mouth out words. So, I'm drama school trained. They trained the Bromley mostly out of my voice. So, you can tell. So a lot of people assume because I don't have a deaf accent, I'm not very deaf. And also because it is an invisible disability. And when someone tells you that you're deaf, I would just say, please take them seriously and believe them. We wouldn't be lying about it. I told my doctor's surgery recently, obviously it's on my medical notes, but I said, I can't call up to book an appointment. I'm deaf. Please, can I email you? And they were like, you can't email me. You have too many, we get too many emails. And then they went onto my medical record and said, I've seen that you've had telephone appointments with the GP, so you need to call us. And like suggesting that I was making up being deaf so that I could email them when actually I could hear. And I had to reply and say, I'm really disappointed I have to tell you this as a medical service, but I can have telephone appointments with the GP because they're in a very quiet room. And I can hear them, or I can ask them to repeat themselves. And also, that's the only method that you're offering me if I can't come in. So I've got to do it if I want to see the GP. But if I call up reception, there's 3 of you in there. You're in the middle of the doctor's surgery. There's people coming in. There's lots of background noise. It's very stressful for me. I can't understand what you're saying. Please just give me an accessible way to book. And that is a medical service that can see my medical records that say that I'm deaf and that I've been to an audiologist and that there is a graph that measures how deaf I am on my medical records. So, and they assumed that I was lying because one time I used the phone. And it is just wild, the amount of people who just don't believe you. Like, people have said to me that I say I'm deaf for attention, and that, and that I've written. So all my all my advocacy work is for attention, and actually I'm not deaf. And even things like writing schemes where they're looking for disabled people to write disabled stories, like authored by disabled people with disabled main characters, so that it's authentic. And I wrote a script about a deaf woman. I was told by a exec in the comedy writing world that I wasn't really disabled, so I couldn't apply. And deafness is legally a disability. Like, under the law, I am disabled. And also, disabled isn't, the disabled community is amazing, and disability isn't a scary, horrible word. Like, I'm very proud to be part of the disabled community. I have a different experience to a lot of people, because I can pass, in inverted commas, for not disabled, because I have an invisible disability. But we face different challenges in that people don't believe us or take us seriously. So yeah, please take someone seriously if they tell you that they're deaf.
Yeah, that's bizarre, and it's just got me thinking. I did this activity at school where you sit in a wheelchair for a day and to try and experience life as a mobility sort of disabled person. But I'm just trying to imagine, like, maybe going into London, going to like meetings without any hearing. Like, how would you handle the trains? How would you do the underground? How would you get around the there's so many health and safety things which are really gonna, well, very much impact you when you can't hear what's going on. And you must end up when trains are diverted or cancelled or stuff, it must take you so much longer to get to places because you can't hear the announcement that comes through that's telling people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I write about this in my book, nice segue, Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness. But it is a massive safety issue. And being a woman walking home late at night is scary enough anyway. But if you are worried that you can't hear someone creeping up behind you, it's even scarier. So, constantly looking around you so you see something, because you can't rely on your hearing. And yeah, trains and public transport is so difficult. And there is a disabled person's rail card. So anyone who has any level of deafness or hearing loss or uses a hearing aid, you can get the disabled person's rail card, which gives you a third off travel. And again, people will say, yeah, but you don't really need money off travel, like, you're fine. But just like you said, if there's a diversion and everything's done on announcements, I can't hear it. And also, what you said about not being able to hear very much if you're going into town and stuff. Yes, but also, with certain deafness, you can hear, so you'll hear like background noise louder than one person's voice in front of you. So it's also incredibly overwhelming, because crowd noise becomes extra loud, and then you can't pinpoint and hear the specific things you're trying to hear, like announcements, or even someone who works for the rail company in front of you that you're asking questions about the diversions. So yeah, it can be a super stressful environment. And also, you're on high alert, because if there is a diversion, you need to be on it and asking people, or looking at screens. So yeah, even like buying a train ticket, if your card isn't accepted on the machine beeps. I don't hear that. If you're looking for your keys in your bag to open your front door, I can't rely on hearing the jingle to tell whether they're in my bag or not. I actually have to find them and feel them. If you're going through the ticket barrier and I'm not looking at the person at the barrier and they say something like, it's not accepting your ticket, or come over here, or they think I'm ignoring them and that I'm doing something wrong because of that. All these tiny things every single day massively add up. And I think a lot of people don't consider those small things and the impact that they can have on deaf people.
Yeah, so that's going to have like a massive impact on your mental health, isn't it? Like, is it? I would have to assume then that mental health issues are higher in deaf people and people with disabilities because of all of this stuff they have to overcome in life.
Yeah, so there have been studies that show that people who are deaf are twice as likely to have mental health issues and have difficult mental health. And also social isolation can be a really big one, you know, especially if you don't have, and that's what's so important, I think, about thriving as a deaf person, is finding your community, is finding a group of people, and they might be hearing people, but that can support you, understand what you're going through, advocate for you. So like if you're going to lunch with a friend, if your friend can like ring up in advance and say, I'm meeting someone who's deaf, can we have a table with our backs against the wall, because that helps with sound, where there's no speaker, where we're not near the coffee machine, you know, where we're in a quiet corner. Doing that can make such a huge impact. And you know, you'll find now after we've had this conversation, if you go to a coffee shop or a restaurant today, you'll think about how loud everything is, and the speakers, and you know where everything is. And actually sometimes it is hard to find a quiet table, but you know, having a supportive network, also like making connections with other deaf people, other people who have hearing aids if you have them, you know. And the ways to do that is like going to a lip reading class, for example. A lot of them are free. Some of them are funded by the NHS, and you have a community of people all learning to lip read together. Even if you lip read already, it can be really useful. There's also charities. So you can go to charity events. You can learn British Sign Language, which is an amazing tool, and it's really fun. And then you get to meet lots of people. Finding community is such an important part of thriving, because social isolation among deaf people is huge. You know, during the pandemic with the masks, it was impossible to lip read. And, you know, even your one daily or weekly trip, was it, to the supermarket, you know, you still can't talk to anyone because they've all got masks on, you can't understand them.
Yeah. Social isolation, I think, as a sort of bigger, that's like one of the core issues, isn't it, with mental health. And I think whatever you're going through, that is the cause of mental health issues, you know, be that, you know, a traumatic event that's happened in your life, or you know, something that you're really struggling with, or a disability or anything, it's really try and find your tribe. I've been, and we'll come on to talk about other aspects of your life like divorce and stuff later, but I've been going through quite a few issues relating to my divorce recently. I had a really traumatic day last week where I had a bit of a horrible meeting, and I came into London and I met two of my friends who are in very similar situations with kids and with divorces and exes that aren't that great. And it was just so powerful to sit there and the three of us and just moan to each other, because you really feel like you don't want to burden people with your like daily like troubles and stuff that's really really getting you down. But finding your community is just so powerful in so many situations. So yeah, it can empower you, it can get you out of a hole, it can excel you. But yeah, absolutely worth doing.
And also you can learn from your community. Like, you know, I have a podcast about divorce, and
Yeah.
I started it because I didn't know anyone else like in my friendship group or anything who was getting divorced. So I sort of started a podcast basically to try and create my own divorce community. And now it's lovely, and like everyone I interview, I learn stuff from them. And you know, even in the chats of the people who listen to the podcast, like we have a Patreon account and we have a little Discord chat, and like people share their news and the other people can celebrate with them because they know what it means. And yeah, it's so important to kind of share and talk. And
Yeah.
counselling, I always have counselling too.
Yeah. In fact, the podcast I did that is being published today is actually about with a therapist in training. So the big question was, how can therapy help me? And I am like the biggest fan of therapy and counselling, and I've had it my whole life. And I think any kind of, if you can afford it, I know there's issues around affordability of counselling, but if you can afford it, it's absolutely worth having, and everybody will benefit from some counselling or therapy. It sort of depends your trauma and your issues. Like some people counselling's fine, some people therapy's a bit more appropriate, but yeah, huge fan of that.
Yeah, and you can get it on the NHS. There is normally long waiting lists, but yeah, I wouldn't be here and together as a human if I hadn't had counselling for my whole life. Not that I'm that together already, but I mean, I'm like got clothes on and my hair's messy because I had a massage yesterday and they did that oil thing in your hair, and when you're like, no, I've got to go home with oily hair and I haven't washed it yet. But apart from that,
it's really good for your scalp though. Leave
yeah,
it on
it
for as
is.
long as possible.
Yeah.
Love a head massage. That's my favorite thing. Okay, so I think it's also worth talking about financial impacts, because this is something that I have and in my 12 years of doing Mrs. Mummypenny and talking about money, I've never written about the financial impacts of being a deaf person. Now, I'm going to assume that it costs you a lot more money than a regular person.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of things are available on the NHS, but they're not necessarily the most modern. So, for example, hearing aids are available on the NHS, but it'd be like if you imagine phones were available on the NHS, you wouldn't get the latest iPhone, and it can be a bit of a postcode lottery. Like some areas you can get really advanced hearing aids, like with Bluetooth capabilities and stuff, and others you'd get the sort of more basic model. So even if you get the basic model, it comes with batteries, and there are services where you can get free batteries, but most deaf people I know buy their hearing aid batteries, so that's an extra cost. Obviously, if you want an up-to-date hearing aid, which you kind of do because you wear it every day, it helps you survive in a hearing world. With the modern ones are great. Like, I love my hearing aid. She's pink and she has Bluetooth, so I'm listening to you now through my hearing aid. I can stream podcasts and music. I can connect to the TV. I can answer the telephone. And it makes it much easier because obviously the sound is going into my ear through the hearing aid. And that they have special noise cancelling functions, so it does help in those environments where everything's really loud. It's not perfect, but it helps. So a pair of modern hearing aids can cost £6,000.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so then you're buying them from a private audiologist, and so your private audiology sessions cost money to have updates or to check up on the hearing aids. Some people offer like the aftercare of hearing aids, like included in the price, but if anything went wrong with it, you'd still have to go along. Then there's things like, so my hearing aids are rechargeable, so they don't have the tiny batteries, which is great, because you lose them and they have stickers on them and you find stickers all over yourself. So mine are rechargeable just like my phone is, so I take them off at night and put them in the charger. That obviously needs charging, which is money on electricity. There's other hearing aids that need charging, so there's something called a Roger pen that you can connect to your hearing aids. So it's like a little extra. It makes me feel like a spy, basically. If I go to like a comp, if I put that in the front next to the speaker and then I go and sit wherever I want, it connects directly to my hearing aid. And then obviously people forget it's there and then have little chats and I can hear what's going on, which is why it makes me feel like a spy. So the Roger pen, you can usually get that through your work or access to work. But obviously that takes a lot of time and applying for it and things like that. You can buy it separately, but we're talking hundreds of pounds. That takes charging every time you use it. And it's also just the time. Like the extra time, and time is money, the extra time traveling because you can't hear the announcements and then you have to change trains and then you're late for stuff. or the extra time because you can't call somewhere because you know it's going to be like booking a table at a restaurant. I can't call up a restaurant during their busy period because they normally answer the phone on the restaurant floor and I won't be able to hear them. So, I have to like email or go through an online service to book a restaurant. And obviously independent restaurants don't often have those. So it takes longer even to like just go out for dinner. So there are a lot of things that cost more money, being disabled and being deaf.
And do you think it's I'm not sure it has because of what you've done in your career, but do you think it's impacted your career choices in does it mean you have less options available to you with what you've done with your work?
Well, I mean, it does. Luckily, I have a job where I can kind of mold what I do. But if you are in the workplace, you might, for example, in an open plan office, find that it's too stressful an environment for you. And workplaces should legally make reasonable adjustments, it's called, to make your workplace accessible so you can do your job. But as I said, when you're deaf and it's an invisible disability, a lot of people don't quite understand the level and the difference that things can make, like soft furnishings, pillows, rugs, they absorb sound. So if you've got an open plan office with really high ceilings, like no soft seating areas, that's going to be terrible because all the sound is going to bounce around and be really overwhelming. And, I have ADHD. And so for neurodiverse people as well, it can be overwhelming for other reasons. So, even things like if your employer were to put up like a partition, so even just your group of colleagues is in a little area, just like one of those movable fabric partitions, or even like plants can absorb sound. So if you have those tall plants and that looks nice, if you have a little seating area with cushions or, and that again looks nice, but that can really, really help with sound. And then also if you have a job that relies on making telephone calls, there shouldn't be discrimination. But if someone sees that you're deaf on your CV, there can be. And especially when I sort of came out and, I wrote my book about deafness, and I also write children's books with deaf protagonists, and I am an ambassador for RNID, which is the Royal National Institute for Deaf People. And I started talking really publicly about my deaf experience. I didn't get as many auditions at acting jobs, and I didn't have an acting job for the longest of my career. Now, that could be coincidence. I could have got really bad at acting for a period of time, but it did seem interesting that it coincided with me sort of speaking publicly, and also adding the fact that I was deaf and used a hearing aid to my acting CV. So there is still massive prejudice, and there shouldn't be. It's against the law. It's discrimination if someone doesn't hire you based on the fact that you're deaf. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But all of it. But when I found out I was deaf and I needed a hearing aid, I was doing a lot of radio at the time, and I thought, oh my God, well, I can't be a radio presenter who's deaf, like what? And same with period dramas, I thought, God, I can't wear my hearing aid in a period drama. So I just used to like not tell anyone and take my hearing aid out and just hope for the best. So like I've not heard the director say action before. Because I didn't have my hearing aid in and I hadn't told anyone because I was worried that, it would make me lose my job. But, since I have been more open about it on the sets where they've accepted me, it's been amazing, and people have been really brilliant. And, when I present on the radio, instead of having people phone in, I have them like on a video call so I can lip read. Everyone's been fine with that. It is possible to do on the radio. People might not be used to it, but when you explain it, and I always try and fight for having kind of transcripts of shows that I've done. Or if you listen to some of the radio apps on your iPad, it comes and you turn on automatic captions, it can caption it. Not always
Yeah,
brilliantly, but, you know, and I think actually making audio more accessible for the 18 million people in the UK who have some form of hearing loss or deafness is super important.
that's astounding. It's that number. Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway, that it's what, a third of the UK population, pretty much.
Yeah.
So can we just touch on the ADHD diagnosis that you mentioned as well? So I've got a lot of female friends, and it is all women, who are getting recent diagnoses. That's not even a word. Now it's so frustrating, because it's like we have lived with masking all of these just tendencies and ways our brain works throughout our lives, and we've become so astute at it that we perceive to the world that, because I've got some ADHD traits, and it's something that I'm really interested in. One of my children has got quite extreme ADHD traits, so we're just going through a diagnosis at the moment. But I'm really trying to, as you said, when you find something out, you research it. That's what I'm doing at the moment. So impart your like guidance and knowledge onto me as to how you sort of dealt with it, and maybe how you'd deal with it with a child as well.
Yeah, so I think for a long time I've thought I had ADHD, and you read up about it and you think, yeah, I've got those symptoms, or there's lots of, Instagram and TikTok videos saying these are the symptoms of ADHD. But I also know that I have anxiety, and I'm very quick to self-diagnose. So I also was
Hey.
very aware, yeah, that I might be just attributing lots of things to having ADHD, and which is why getting a diagnosis for me was really important. And I had been on the NHS waiting list for 2 years and I still hadn't heard anything. And when I had my little girl, I felt like it was really bringing my ADHD to the fore, and not the good bits, because I actually really love having ADHD, and I think it makes me more creative. I'm an idea machine, which is really good for like writing and what I do and pitching. It's made me impulsively do lots of things that I might not have otherwise done, like decide to write a children's book and give that a go, and now that's one of my favorite things to do. And so it has done amazing things for me. But I felt like when my daughter came along, all of my kind of strategies for like writing a to-do list and going through it, and like putting things in my diary and a reminder in my diary, suddenly wasn't working, because there was so many other things going on. So I felt like I'd got my like how to survive at work and not miss every meeting and be late for everything down. And then all of a sudden I had a baby, and also she has medical needs, and we were in hospital with her for 3 months. So all of a sudden there was all this other stuff, and it was like I didn't have the strategies in my personal life for my ADHD to be able to manage that. And so I was feeling really, really overwhelmed, and I decided that for me I wanted to get a private diagnosis, and I shared it kind of a bit on Instagram and asked other people about it. And I think the main thing people were saying is, medication wise, obviously not all GPs accept private diagnosis. And I had messages from GPs as well saying, it's not us, it's like the system doesn't allow us to accept it. It's not us just being like, we won't accept it. And so that means that if you do go down the medication route, you can end up spending quite a lot of money, because you have to have a consultation and then pay for the medication, which can be like 300-400 quid a month. So for me, it was less about medication and more about, I just wanted to know if I have it, and that I'm not self-diagnosing wrongly from the internet. And then if I have it, then I can look at strategies to deal with it. And so I went with ADHD Certify, they're called. They did give full disclosure, they did gift me the assessment, and in return I did social media content around it and how it works. But I thought it was great. And then they told me that I do have ADHD, and it's combined type ADHD. And it's just made me realize so much about myself, because I would have said, so combined is half of that is the kind of attention kind of deficit, and what we might imagine from people with ADHD or children that we see is that they sort of get up all the time and can't sit still. And I would have always said to you that I'm really good at sitting still, but since I've learned that is a massive masking technique. Yeah. So I might keep my bottom on a chair, but that doesn't mean I'm sitting still. You know, I do things like I skin pick, I chew the skin around my nails, I
do that really badly.
fiddle with things that I'm wearing, shift my position in the chair, I jig my knee, I rotate my ankles. And so, you know, going from no, I'm actually really good at staying physically still, then realizing that I have ADHD and noticing all of my masking tricks. And even things like, because for my job, I interview people a lot. And so I think I'm good at listening. And I am good at listening, but I'm masking a lot of the time, because the listening face is that you're still and you're looking at the person and nodding, right? So I can listen, but because of my ADHD, I can also think about something completely different, think about the questions that might be coming up, think about questions that I want to ask, think about what I'm doing after the interview is over. But I'm good at masking all that, so I do my listening face. So, you know, it's just been such a big realization of all these things that I do. And also being more open about it with other people, you know, in a work environment. Because I talk a lot. Shock, as you may have noticed, which is a symptom of ADHD, is talking a lot and also talking about yourself. So if someone shares a story and they say, I went on holiday to Greece and blah, 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 apparently neurotypical people will then ask questions about their story, whereas an ADHD person might share a story back about also going to Greece, because we see that as a way of relating.
Yeah.
So we're saying, I hear your story and here's a story of mine, and that's how we're connecting. But actually other people are like, why is she talking about herself all the time? Why is she not asking questions about me? And so noticing that, and also telling people I have ADHD, so I might talk in a really direct way, I might talk a lot, I might interrupt them, but it doesn't mean that I'm not listening or that I'm being rude. It's just the way my brain works has been really useful.
I do think it's very powerful in the way that you got your fingers in a lot of pies, and that almost, because I do this as well. So it's almost like it's a superpower for like self-employed people that are very well diversified, because I have tried literally everything you could possibly imagine with like 12 years of Mrs. Mummypenny, and then you actually work out, like you said, the things that you're really good at. Totally along the way, you're gonna mess up some things big time and make some really big mistakes. But then that's part of the sort of risk taking sort of part of your mind as well, isn't it? Which I don't think is a bad thing, because if you don't try all these different things, you won't know what you excel at. So yeah, I can definitely see it's a superpower, as well as can be a hindrance. Where I'm finding it really tough is in an educational setting, because traditional schooling is just not set up for somebody that struggles with a classroom environment, and you know, struggles when they don't understand what's going on around them, or when there's lots of loud noises around them. So it's my heart goes out to anybody watching, listening, that has a child with SEN needs, because it's a constant battle to get schools to deal with it.
And also with deaf children as well, you know, in deaf environments, for example, you know, I know a deaf mum who has a deaf child, and in the home environment, it's okay, you know, it's accepted. And in a deaf environment, it's accepted for you to physically touch someone to get their attention, because obviously you can't shout from far away. And then obviously in a school environment, a teacher might be like, what are you doing? You know, don't grab me to get my attention, just say my name. And there's lots of misconceptions, and I think there isn't that in a lot of places there isn't that open dialogue. And I actually heard a lovely story recently of like a great example of an education environment being accessible, which was that, you know, one of the children was finding the classroom environment overwhelming, and it was a lovely day outside and they kept going over to the window and looking outside, and then the teacher decided to take the whole class and do the lesson out in the field. And like, what a lovely and easy and accessible way of you know, just changing the environment for everyone in the class, to make it so that everyone can enjoy the class. And I bet the children who, you know, aren't neurodiverse or weren't kind of having difficulty in a classroom environment enjoyed that too. You know, it's something different.
Yeah, I always used to love outdoor classrooms when I was at school, for definite. Right, I'm just keeping an eye on time because we've been talking for quite a long time. And we were going to talk about divorce, but maybe what I'll say on divorce is I'm going to do your podcast in a couple of weeks. So I will, of course, that will be shared with everybody that listens to this. So then will be a very in-depth conversation about the positives of divorce, because there are a lot of positives.
Yeah.
There's also some shitty parts.
Yeah, it's a whirlwind, isn't it, divorce? But yeah, my podcast's called The Divorce Social, so we can delve into full divorce stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. So Sam, how do people find you on the internet?
So I have a website which is samanthabaines.com, and it's Baines. And then I'm on all of the social medias: Instagram, X, TikTok, even LinkedIn, at Samantha Baines. So find me on all of those.
Yeah, your Instagram's really good. Oh, the thing that I love the most about your Instagram is when you do your charity shop hauls. I absolutely love it because you're so good at finding designer stuff. And I'm like, I'm so jealous.
Well, I go to good places as well, and I love a rummage. Also, I think the ADHD thing, it's like the thrill of the find. That's what I'm chasing.
God, I've just found a Gucci skirt.
Yeah. And then I'm like so excited with myself. Even if I don't buy it, I like share it with everyone.
Or when it's like, what did I find the other day? One of my friends has got a pre-loved shop, and there was some trousers that were, I think they were Prada trousers. Like, Prada is the brand that I'm absolutely obsessed with, but they were like size 8 or something, and I was like, this isn't fair. And even though they were pre-loved, they were still like 100 quid or something. But obviously 100 quid for a pair of Prada trousers is a bargain.
It's quite good. Yeah, I wish I had, like, sometimes when I'm like going to charity shops, I wish I had like a WhatsApp group of women of all different sizes, so that I could be like, Sharon, I found you size 8 Prada trousers, and then they could do the same for me. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Like, set it up. There's another creative random idea.
Great.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you ever so much for talking to me. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your knowledge about a subject that impacts so many people. And just think about the friends that surround you. 1 in 3 of those friends have got some kind of hearing issue. So yeah, let's start talking about it.